restating our land acknowledgement. So I will have a brief pause before I get into that. All right. Metro Arts stands and holds space on the unceded and sovereign lands of the Cherokee East, the Yuchi and Shawnee peoples who have stewarded it for generations. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will, some were drawn to leave their distant homes in the hope of a better life, and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. We acknowledge we are standing on ancestral lands, and we honor the thousands of enslaved African peoples whose lives were physically and spiritually stolen. We pay respects to elders past and present. We invite you to join in our commitment to knowing our Native communities in more meaningful ways in alignment with our restorative arts practices. Thank you. The next thing I'd like to do is recenter our care purpose statement and kind of review our care group norms. I'll read this out loud for the record. The Metro Arts Board of Commissioners established the Committee for Anti-Racism and Equity, also known as CARE, comprised of community members of the Anti-Racist Transformation Team, also known as the ART Team, and commission members as a standing committee to support Metro Arts in keeping the promise of its mission to drive an equitable and vibrant community through the arts. CARE is committed to holding Metro Arts accountable and becoming fully anti-racist in its identity and working for equity in all policies and practices, with the goal of dismantling all systems of oppression within the arts ecosystem. As we review the care group norms, some of the things that are highlighted are listening to understand, taking responsibility, transparency, respect, and creating space for multiple voices. So we like to restate these as we continue to do this work. I think we'll try to remind ourselves of this every meeting. And bear with me as I'm chairing this meeting for the first time, so I'm finding my bearings and trying to be grounded as well. So thank you all. At this time, I guess we will move into the public comment section. I'm not sure if there are any public comments. We see there are none that were submitted, and there are no one is here who has signed up for public comment. So thank you all for that. Moving on to action item C, approving last meeting's minutes. If you all have had a chance to review those minutes, I would entertain a motion to approve the meeting's minutes from February 14th.
I move to approve.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
A second.
Thank you. All committee members in favor, please vote aye. All opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. So we have approved the meeting minutes, and we will move on to we will move on to agenda item D, which are introductions. So I guess first I'll introduce myself. My name is Trey Harden. I am a fairly new commissioner here and the new chair of the CARE committee. I formerly worked at Metro Arts and have worked with a few of you in this role, not in this role, but in this body. So I'm excited to be back. I know that a lot of stuff has been going on, and I think this body can be very productive and very powerful in making some alignment within the community and Metro Arts, and I know that that's really needed right now. So I appreciate you all for taking your time to be here and be a part of this committee. I would like to just introduce everyone and kind of start to get to know each other further and officially in this space. So I will open it up for introductions. I also want to welcome Dr. Paulette Coleman, the interim executive director here at Metro Arts, as well as Metro Arts staff. It's good to see you all, and thank you all for your support in the weeks leading up to today's meeting. So, in no particular order, if everyone would like to introduce themselves, and if you have any other introductory things to say, please do so. I guess I will start with Ellen on my right.
Okay, Ellen Gilbert. I was one of the original art team members and then rolled on to CARE, and I'm the director of a medium-sized nonprofit arts group, Global Education Center.
Terry McCormick. I'm an arts advocate and also a former member of ART, and I'm so glad we're back.
I'm Heather Lefkowitz. I'm a commissioner, and I'm also very glad we're back.
Chuck Beard, Metro Arts. Been lucky to be associated and working with CARE since I got on, being a hybrid of grants team and then the restorative arts team, and continued now into the community engagement. But just really happy that everybody that is here, and excited that Camille is here but not here. We'll be here again next time. So, yeah.
Good morning, Fatia Suso, arts coordinator, director of the World Agricultural Community Project. And nice to see you, Trey. I was trying to remember, I was like, where did I know him from? Because I know you, but yeah, from here. So good to see you and welcome back, and good to be back.
Good morning. Lydia Youssef, the director of In Mahabba Center in South Nashville. Yeah.
Good morning. I'm Josiah Golson, Restorative Arts and Equity Manager for Metro Arts. Grateful to be sharing space with y'all again.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Paulette Coleman. I am the Interim Executive Director here at Metro Arts.
Well, thank you all. It's nice to meet everyone again, and I guess everyone again. I'm excited to move forward. Moving into the next section of our agenda, action and discussion items. First, we're going to and I guess I'll pause a little bit. I know it's been a while since CARE has met. It's been since February, and a lot has occurred since then. And I know that there might be an incentive to try to get working and get into it. But I think it's really important for me, especially as chair, to find some grounding and to ultimately be on the same page across the board. I think there are some things we need to review in terms of guidelines and next steps in planning and kind of finding how this body can be productive. So I think that's kind of speaking towards some of these agenda items. So, I think reviewing some of our guidelines and scope, revisiting our goals, discussing onboarding, and trying to figure out, our next meetings and planning for that. So, I know that this is meant to be a very collaborative committee in terms of community. I think this is, definitely an outlier from a lot of other Metro committees in the way that it's constructed so I think reviewing that and determining how we want to move forward is my goal for this meeting. As with that said, we'll kind of move into the next agenda item, which is reviewing our CARE guidelines, which I think we all have printed out in front of us.
Yeah, if you want to look at each, like if we take it section by section and see if there are things we need to revisit in each section, maybe based on your judgment and the judgment of the committee, that sounds fine.
Pardon me. I think one thing that would probably be helpful is looking at the art team. And there's a brief diagram that's printed, and it talks about kind of the steps of the art team and how it was intended to function in terms of policy and programmatic decision making. So I will read through this just for those who might be listening in. The art team, or anti-racism transformation team, was meant to name areas of concern and provide analysis to the arts ecosystem in Metro Arts as a policymaker and funder, and make policy or programmatic recommendations. So the idea would be that the Metro Arts Equity Committee would review recommendations, oversee internal Metro Arts Agency anti-racism work, and make policy recommendations to the board or commission. The commission would review those committee recommendations and make final policy decisions. And the intention was that those decisions and possible changes to policies would help create a more equitable and vibrant community. I think we've seen this, at play a little bit. We've seen some attempts to change policies, and I know we're at a space where it can be difficult, and this work is always difficult. And I think, quick little story time, when my first day as an employee of Metro Arts was actually a 3-day anti-racism training at Scared Bennett Center, and I had no idea what I was getting into. I had no idea what that work meant, and this was in 2016. And one of the most impactful exercises we did in that meeting was we had this huge timeline of different things that occurred, specifically in America, I think, around racism and kind of what we noticed after we would all go around. We were basically marking different events that happened throughout, from slavery to present day times, the civil rights movement, a lot of different things. And almost every action had a reaction. There was a little bit of progress, and then there was kind of a pushback. So basically, what I got from that was, as we do this work, we might feel we have breakthroughs, but then there's always a bit of pushback. And so without getting, into too much detail about what that might look like here in Metro Arts, I think, I think we're here to continue to push and try to make things more equitable for our community. And I think keeping in mind of our care norms, we know that will not be easy. We know that there will be challenges. We know that when we do have these innovative ideas, that it's not always easy to get everyone on board. So considering that, I think that really highlights the purpose of this committee. We're here to continue to challenge the status quo, while also being creative and thinking of ways to allow these policies to continue to live within Metro and within Metro Arts in ways that are impactful ultimately to our arts community and making it more equitable. So, I will say that, and we can kind of now take a look. Feel free to interrupt me as well, because this is my first time chairing a meeting, so I am a little bit nervous, but I want this to be interactive. So,
Chair Hardin, we've been in discussion with you and with several members of the committee, and this is also for purposes of those that may be watching or for the public record to understand that we haven't met in a couple of months as a committee, but in that time, the staff has reached out individually with members, while also being in dialogue with Chair Hardin about work for care going forward. And so we have discussed what, to your point about the history of care, and then the history that predates that with the art team, what are those original goals that were set out of what the art team would do, and then what the equity committee that we now know as CARE would do, and how that would translate into impactful work and decisions and policies and procedures from the commission itself. And it's been our understanding from members that there's been a disconnect in the past where the original goals and the effectiveness that the art team was designed to do has not necessarily translated in what CARE is able to do now as a committee that's a part of a government entity. And so to the points A and B in our agenda, if it's okay with you, Chair Hardin, maybe it's a good moment to invite members of CARE, both current and relatively new, to speak to the what we feel may be missing from what CARE is able to do, or how it's able to do it operationally, and what things we need to be thinking about that we could add to bylaws or add to its makeup to make sure that happens. And then also for our newer members, where what your ideas and thoughts are, also both those that we've spoken about with you individually, but also what you can share in the public context. So we have notes, but we want to make sure there's space for each member to be able to speak to that also.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll do my best to give some of the original work some context, including what you've just given information on. So the purpose was to, quite simply, to hold the commission, the agency, accountable for policy change and action, to be more inclusive, hear the voice, see the community, the arts community, and address areas of resource restriction, resource deserts that were needed to make everyone, give everyone a better chance to thrive. We worked really hard at creating cohesion within the group, and began assessing the arts community, inviting them into conversation, and finding out where are we, where does this stand. Our first primary goal was to put together a report that canvassed the condition of the arts ecosystem and Metro Arts engagement with it, and we did that. Along the way, I personally began to feel that the Board of Commissioners, though they stood us up with a particular kind of philosophy around equity, created the equity statement, all that stuff, didn't themselves, as a body, understand what it really meant to intentionally dismantle a system of racism, or an agent or an entity, a governmental agency that has in it inherently is infused with a supremacist philosophy. So that kind of informed the work that began to happen. Now, the report that we put together, I was never fully acknowledged. And it was valuable information. It still exists. I think you have access to it. So it would be good, I think, to maybe compare that with what's been done recently, and let's see where the gaps are. In terms of moving forward, I think with the commission board we have now, I think they are beginning to ask those questions and gather that information for themselves to see where we were and where we need to go. But I still am not confident that the board understands what it is that really needs to happen. So that's what I see the work to be.
I have a few thoughts. I also agree that the commission is not ready, or maybe not willing at this point to understand what equity is. And just reading through this, I have a few thoughts. In terms of the history of Metro Arts, I think that now that we have the MHRC report, you can see a very clear difference in the history telling of Metro Arts from the MHRC report and from this 2020 guidelines, because the MHRC report focuses on the disparity that is pretty obvious with Metro Arts funding. And this kind of champions a lot of the triumphs that's been happening, which are minimal at best, in my opinion. And I get that these are things that we're moving forward, but to me, equity is not about the little triumphs when communities have had severe erasure of their culture and their arts, and that's the consequence of the lack of funding. And so to me, there needs to be something within the history telling that records the lack of funding and the impact of that in communities, and that it has been going significantly to white communities and specifically downtown. And I think that needs to be front and center. Because to me, if we're not going to be truthful about the history of Metro Arts, why it was created, who it's been funding, who it hasn't been funding, and that process within the grant process, we're not going to get closer to any level of justice or equity in this work if we're not being truthful. The other things, I'd like to hear more about holding the commission accountable and what that was envisioned in the beginning. I get that that's we would all love to hold the commission accountable, but that seems to be a lofty goal for the community members to do that. So I'm in agreement that there should be some checks and balances, and I'd like to hear from other members about how that's done. I want to push back against the idea of resource desert. I think communities have been deliberately underfunded in order to create profit for other communities. So I want to very specifically name that is a manufactured, that it's not like, oh, it's just a desert that you see. That is a very deliberate choice, an active choice from these commissioners and from Metro government that's upholding these the decisions that the commission makes. And I think that part also needs to be added here, that this is not whoopsie daisies. Some commissioners decided to fund 70 to 80% of white people and decided to completely not fund Fisk, not fund the Jefferson Street Sound Museum. That's not a mistake. And I think there needs to be something explicit. I think white people tend to really like to be like, be courageous, take risks, ask questions, speak the truth to power, knowledge, trainings. I think there needs to be something very explicit about redistributing equitably the money that our taxes going into the government and should be coming back into our community. And that should be the material redistribution needs to be something that's really well stated within CARE. Okay, so the last thing I'll say, because I know I tend to dump, the last thing I will say is that we need to define equity because the commission cannot do that, does not have a place to even comprehend the magnitude of the loss and the harm that they have committed to Nashvillians. So I think we need to clearly define that. Because it's distressing to me when I hear public comments from white people who are saying the money should go to us to give to black people. That is not what equity is. And it's distressing to me when I hear from artists of color who are saying, I just want to have my own art and create my own art. I don't want it regulated by a white person. I don't want it to be something that white people fantasize about and feel like this art is art, and this art is not, and regulating it through middle management. So I think we really need to define equity so that when someone comes up to the commission and says, you know, my organization should be funded because I I support Black artists. That should not be acceptable. And as someone who's been on grant panels, a lot of people, the white people on middle management, in a lot of these nonprofits really don't know what equity is. So if everyone in the room does not know what equity is and we're all misusing the term, there has to be some stop to kind of say, here's the standard that we're expecting. White middle management should not be saying, oh, we have one Black board member with a nonprofit that's in North Nashville, and that should not be considered, an acceptable, that should not be considered equity when you are primarily serving Black community members and you finally got a Black board member to do free labor for you. So a lot of examples, but I think, to me, in summary, the history needs to be written in a way to understand the harm that has happened. Equity needs to be defined. The goal needs to be about the financial redistribution of our tax dollars. That should be somewhere stated in here. We like to talk about harm. We like to spend hours doing it and months, but we need to really talk about people are waiting for this, and people need this. And then just to be, maybe to clarify what hold accountable means.
Thank you. Lydia, feel free to dump. I think that's why we have 2 hours here in this space, is to hear and to communicate. So definitely don't feel like you need to share less while we're here. Are there any other kind of comments at this time?
I was going to add just by listening, but since Terry was talking about the history, and one of the first things that Lydia was speaking about was the history. I didn't know with that question about what the process of accountability looked like for commission, or just how that transition from art team to care, what was, like Josiah spoke to, the not the vibe, but what was that transition like for expectations and what has actually happened, and as we're talking about what needs to happen going forward.
Are you asking about the methodology? Of
Yeah,
how that was?
within the scope, like, because
Okay.
it just talks about references, but what was the vision from those that were on the art team and coming in, of what could be?
Okay. I think I'm going to try to answer your question.
Yeah.
So the art team would deliberate, and again, we had the report. The report illuminated a lot of what Lydia has spoken to. And so our job, our method of bringing that information, bringing issues of equity to the commission was to deliberate and then make recommendations. But if a body is not rooted and centered in what equity is, personally and in terms of their relationship with the community, then it's going to be difficult to understand how they are to interact, how they are to be bodies of change. And that was one of the biggest barriers, was not being able to get the need to align on equity, to define equity, to come to some kind of consensus on equity between the purpose of the art team and the commission as it stood at that point. Onboarding, as we've heard recently, there's not a method really of onboarding the commissioners. That's a huge deficit. That was one of the things that we tried to address. It never got there. As issues were brought to the committee, actually once we became CARE, and the report was what we were still working off of. Okay. I just lost my train of thought. Sorry. I'm going to have to stop. I just lost my train of thought. Sorry.
We had collected dozens of stories from artists and arts organizations who had gone under about their experience with Metro Arts and why they just gave up trying to get funding. And one of the issues was it's a % of your budget that you can ask for. And so a lot of these were small, just beginning. And so no matter, or they didn't have staff, so no overhead. So no matter how much work you did, you can only get, like, say, $3,000 if it's only 10% of your budget or whatever. So a lot of people just gave up on Metro Arts because they felt like they were getting so little funding and so little support, they could just do it on their own. Also, we chose one program. We wrote an equity lens, which has been edited since we wrote it, by whom I don't know. But we chose one program that Metro Arts could use as a sample program, and we chose Thrive because it was new, right? About how to apply that lens to that one program and make sure that everything within it. But then the staff kind of took it as a mandate and used it not as a lens to look within themselves about how to put equity into the program, but just like a checklist. So it wasn't really used in the way that our team had designed it to be used. We also used to have a co-chair, a community co-chair, which ended with CARE. When it became CARE, the co-chair was kind of pushed aside, so there wasn't this much community input in the making of the agendas even for the meetings. And there's been we all took training together, commissioners, staff, and our team, and there's been no training. I think we tried one time and only a couple of commissioners came, I think 2, right? So there hasn't been as many opportunities for everybody to get together as there used to be.
I remembered my next point. There was a point where HR was going to produce its next version of the employee standards. And we requested a copy, and CARE began to review that. We found issues. We requested dialogue around it and made recommendations. We turned that report in. I don't think it was ever handed back. So those are the barriers that some of the barriers that we came up on. Was we, in earnest, were doing what we were charged to do. But when we delivered back those things to be analyzed, we weren't met with enough understanding for that to happen.
I guess, thank you all for sharing. I think one of the things, and Ellen, I think you reminded me, is that, as we take a direct look at the guidelines and the makeup and composition of this body, that I think, for me, most interestingly, is that, the CARE committee will have no more than 13 members, including 2 arts commissioners, which we do have, and a community co-chair, which I don't think that we've officially identified. I know we've talked about it maybe, but I think that needs to be clear. And I think, by the time we have next meeting, I think, I know it might be my responsibility to make that clear. So, as you all are speaking, I'm taking a note of things that probably need to happen. Maybe not this meeting, but that need to be on the agenda for next meeting. And I hope that I can meet with you all individually between that time and kind of come to a consensus. And Dr. Coleman and I spoke briefly about that a little bit, just about kind of making sure that we are onboarding and that we are established and kind of it's clear to everyone in the room what this committee is supposed to look like and how it's supposed to operate. And I think just getting on track of like, okay, how, and I also think that we can invite more people into this room. It says up to 13. And I know that this may not be the most attractive thing for people to jump into right now. But we have to find a way to make that happen. And it sounds like step one is defining equity and making it not just for us in this room to understand what equity is, but for something we can take and maybe that I can take to the commission and say, hey, this is what Metro Arts says that equity is, and this is what we want it to be. So yeah, as we continue this discussion, I just want you all to know that I'm these are the things that I'm starting to identify as next steps. I'm just checking in with you all and kind of seeing if I'm hearing you all correctly. A good friend of mine we would always like, okay, can you repeat that back to me? Like what you just said, is that what I'm hearing? So a little bit just trying to check in and make sure that I'm hearing you all correctly. So yeah, I will say that.
I had a question about the work. I don't think I've ever asked you this, but I was wondering about the scope and the history in terms of thinking about the codes and regulations from council and the charter and things like that. And has that ever been a part of the work of either art or care too, like thinking about, I guess it would be advocacy or direction for the commissioners in terms of advocating for things that would kind of bake this into the things that guide commissioners, I guess. Does this make sense?
Well, we've been saying for the past year and a half that the bylaws need to be looked at. But I don't know if there's no one has responded to that.
It was a persistent part of our conversations. But again, things that we recommended for the commission at that time were not carried forward in conversation or in decision. And so we'd raise, more, what's going on? Why aren't we hearing? Why isn't this moving? And that did not change. Art team was set up to have a good measure of autonomy, to be able to hold the commission, the agency, accountable. Before CARE became CARE, we asked for, because at that time it was community members, which was the majority of the group, and then staff and the ED. No commission representation unless they dropped in for a meeting. We began to, because we weren't allowed at that time to, we could attend a commission meeting, we could not participate, and the public comment didn't exist at that point.
We did make reports. We were able to make reports.
Okay, but we couldn't be part of the conversation. So we requested that we have commissioners on a more regular basis attend our meetings. The answer to that was to install 2 commissioners onto the group, who then became the chairs of the group, kind of eradicating or beginning to eradicate the co-chair model and the consensus model, because then there was Robert's Rules of Order. All of that structure was placed on top of the art team, which immediately when that happens, you start to it constricts. And the more you constrict, the harder the equity conversation can move forward.
We also met whenever we wanted. So we had our monthly meeting, but then we got together all the times to just talk about what could be done and what was happening in the community.
So I have a question. And maybe it's a little bit related to what the last question was in the comments that we just heard. So this question has been on my mind for a while, and I guess really not knowing how to address it, or where does it fall. So I still consider myself a newcomer to this group, because I'm still trying to figure out what in the world do we do? Are we doing? What is the true impact of this group? So my question is, what is the position of power of CARE when it comes to the Arts Commission? When there are situations arising and the recommendations are made, and the commissioners perhaps do not take the recommendations, what does that say about the position of CARE? What's the use? What's the function of it? When there are situations arising that have to do with inequitable practices or maybe even community conversations that are going on, what's going on out in the community, that someone is reporting something that has gone on and it's, it's not an equitable practice. There's some sort of discord going on that involves the commission, the Arts Commission, and funding perhaps. Where do we come into play? Why do we not have our own hearings or anything like that? Is that not something that this group should be in a position to do, so that there's a little more voice and power behind what we collectively discuss and try to resolve to help? What are we here for? That's my question.
I think that's a great question. And I think, even with Dr. Coleman, we had this conversation about equity work, and, I'm going to use other examples of committees, like the Public Art Committee. It's pretty cut and dry. You understand, okay, we're here, there's a percent fund, we're here to make recommendations based on those guidelines, the public art guidelines, and we're here to create projects in our communities, and those approval processes are very step by step. It's very clear. And we talked about basically the need for clarifying that. And I think that's kind of a goal for this meeting and maybe the next couple of meetings of what are the tangible outcomes that we can have in this body. And yeah, I hate to not be able to answer that for you clearly, but I think that that's kind of our work to do in taking what's been offered. We need to kind of look at some of these reports and identify ways that that we can be impactful, I think. And moving forward, I know myself, I would like to have more of a voice for CARE in the commission meetings as we do start to move forward. And yeah, participation, I think this is a committee where I would like to see people coming in the room and attending. And I would like for there to be public comment in this committee, specifically the committee that has room for 11 community members to actually serve. It could be really powerful if we can, come together and figure out an answer to that question, and more so belief that it does mean something. And I echo your concern of not really understanding how we can be productive, because it hasn't really been shown yet. And on paper it looks great. We're like, here's the steps. We make recommendations. The commission reviews recommendations. We change the policy, and the last thing on the list is a more equitable and vibrant community. And that sounds wonderful, but it is very complicated in my head, and it's a little cloudy of how we can make that a part of the process and how we can write that on paper. And ultimately, I think when we talk about the equity work, it's not necessarily making these action items, but it's changing the way that we're thinking. It's completely a complete overhaul of the way that people look at the arts community and the policies, to the point where they make those decisions naturally. And it's not it's not an equity decision. It's an art decision that is living inside, that just has equity in it. if that makes sense. And please, if it doesn't make sense, please correct me. But yeah, I think that a lot of that is defining what equity is and onboarding our commission members to having that lens and having that as a priority at any decision we make, whether it's particular to grants funding, whether it's particular to public art, restorative justice. There's a lot of different ways that we need to think about that. So, but I think it's going to take time for us to find that grounding, not just in this room, but with our commission and with staff, and everyone needs to be on one accord in order for this equity work to actually move forward. I definitely can't do it by myself, yeah, so that's a very long answer to not answer your question exactly, but I'll be quiet now.
Speaking as a staff person responsible for supporting CARE and for supporting Commissioner Hardin, thus far, like hearing from everyone who shared up to this point, there definitely seem to be three things that have emerged as themes and as needs that you've spoken to a bit already also, but one being a shared understanding and sense of history. We have current reports like the MHRC report that in many ways tell the same story that the report done by the art team has told. These stories have come up time and time again. The harm has been perpetuated, is cyclical. And then it's shown, it's exposed, it's told through personal narratives and told through data. And yet it continues because there's not like concrete action that happens. Second is a need for a definition of equity that not only is shared and understood and clear, but operational, that can actually be implemented into practice, that can be used as a lens that can then provide a government body just as much as an everyday citizen an understanding of whether things are done properly and fairly and with a sense of justice. And then third, thinking about the actual authority that CARE has, it feels and it seems that it's limited to the amount of accountability that the commission will have to the recommendations or to whatever CARE produces out of its meetings. And if the commission does not have to be accountable for it, then, Fatia, to your point, it really does render CARE's power nil. And so I think that from the perspective, again, as a staff person, thinking about what dialogues and what decisions this body makes that we can support to execute on behalf of Metro Arts, at making the work happen to support artists with funding, with resources, and thinking intentionally about what are ways that this body can create actions that require accountability and transparency from the commission seems like the framework that may be needed in order to figure out how CARE can take its idea, its sense of justice, and actually be able to get results and outcomes with it.
To me, the commission has to be involved in helping define equity, because if they don't go through the process of experience any kind of training on inequity that they may not see, then we want to call them into the work instead of shame them out of it. And I think that's why in the beginning it worked well, because we were all trained together and got like a shared understanding of the history. The timeline was great. I agree with you that we went through the 3-day. But if we define equity and we understand it, but the commission hasn't had to put any work in to help define that, or to look within themselves interpersonally on what equity is and how they may not understand it, I don't see how we can have much power over the decisions the commission makes if they don't truly understand it.
I want to push back on that. So equity is not like a kumbaya, let's everyone get together and define it. I don't think we need the commissions to have input. This has already been defined by so many scholars and intellects who have come before us. I don't think we need to do a circle with commissioners about this. It can just be told to them that this is what is equitable, this is what is not. If you want to make a decision that is not equitable, that should be made public, and there should be some transparency as to which commissioners are voting against equity and are making that active decision. I don't think it's within CARE's capacity to force anybody to make any decision. And supposedly everyone has First Amendment rights. So I think it's much better, instead of forcing the commission to do the will of the community and forcing them to understand what equity is, I think it's much better to instead say, this is what the scholars have said equity is since forever. This is what it looks like. If you want to vote against it, feel free. But here's the transparency and the reporting that we will be doing on that. And I think that the transparency is what goes far within the community. Right now, when we even say the commission, a lot of people don't know who these figures are. They don't know who's on which side. So I think if CARE is able to be informative and be transparent about what's going on in the arts, that can go a far way. And I think that also defines our scope about who we are meant to serve. To me, we are meant to serve the community in Nashville, first and foremost. So I don't want to center commissioners and how they feel about anti-racism and what they've been taught, what they haven't been taught, and go through like a kindergarten class with them. To me, these are, adults. And to me, having a training with them is not, in my opinion, not going to go far, as much as if we are focusing on the community and the community's need to be heard through the work of Metro Arts. So going back to what Fatia was mentioning about a public hearing, I also think there are different departments within Metro that do different things. So I don't want CARE to overreach. So I don't think CARE should be involved with staff as much. There's a full HR department for that takes in reports and works with staff. So to me, that's outside of our scope. I don't think CARE should be involved with anything civil rights-y, because that's MHR, and that should be moved into Metro Human Relations, the other HR. And I think instead the scope of CARE should be focused on making sure community members feel heard and that their ideas are coming to the commission in a processed way, and that there is transparency from the commission's decision on who is equitable and who is not, and that these commissioners, when they go up for their renewals, can be part of that portfolio for them as to how they voted before the rules committee. So I don't think we should be superseding any other Metro department and being overreaching. I think when you're doing too much, you're doing too much. And instead, because we're all volunteers, we should be working towards just engaging with the community, whether that be community meetings every quarter to make sure people feel heard. It was a very powerful thing on, I think you were the only one there on August, or Ellen was also there, and Terry, August 2023, when community members were speaking very openly about what they've been through. I think that that's important, and to replicate the art report and making sure people feel heard. and then also to be a body that is promoting transparency within the commission, and then reporting that out to different departments and to the community.
I disagree about the commission because they're also supposed to serve the community. And so to me, they have to be trained, and it might take some people a lot longer to understand equity, but I don't think we should have a commission that doesn't understand it. I think we have to help them understand it because they also serve the community. That's my opinion.
So I'll just say 2 questions to that. If you think that that's a useful time for a group of volunteers like us. And so I'll just say that. If you think that that's a good use of our time in promoting anti-racism is to sit with the commission and teach them about racism, I would say no, but.
If I, well, if I may say something, I think, you know, I think as we progress and as we get older, we become more accustomed to our ways and the ways that we've been taught, the ways that unknowingly we've just gotten accustomed, especially within Metro and government processes. It is important that we unlearn some of the things that we've been taught without knowing we've been taught them directly. And it is challenging. Lydia, to your point, I don't know if it's our responsibility per se as this body to do that, but it is important that somehow, some way that the commissioners are educated, myself included, regardless of where my heart is. There are things that I can't know just by having a heart for it. And like you said, there are experts, there are people, and I think simply telling them what is right and wrong and telling myself what is, not me telling myself, but being told what is right and wrong isn't as impactful. And I know it takes time and resources, but we really have to find a way for some type of onboarding process where that is and I don't know what that looks like. And it might be a training, and it is hard to get commissioners to commit to a 3 full day training as volunteer. That can be challenging. But there has to be something where together, collectively, we can kind of take that information in and kind of process it and allow it to settle and inform decision making. So I don't know what that looks like, but I do think it's important that as a commission we have some type of program, some type of curriculum that is prepared for us by an expert. It's worth the investment for us to continue to do this work, to have something that is impactful for us individually and collectively. But to your point, I don't think that that's necessarily CARE's responsibility. I think CARE might offer recommendations of how that can happen, but I don't think that consists of CARE showing up at a commission meeting and saying, this is what you all need to do. Yeah, this is wrong. This is right. Those are just my thoughts, and I'm speaking out loud to kind of throw this out there because I don't know exactly what that process looks like. But I do think that in this room we can figure out what that looks like. We can not necessarily show up and commit the labor to actually teaching commissioners and myself what that is, but maybe identifying where our resources can be put to where that investment pays off for the community and the decisions made. So, I'll just say that.
Can I just say one more thing, and then we can someone else can say something, but I think my fear also with DEI trainings and, one, that they're an insurance policy for bodies to feel like, oh, we did that, so no racism can happen. And then, so that's why I'm not a fan of trainings. But then the other thing, too, is that what I've seen from commission meetings is that commissioners co-opt the language of anti-racism to do the exact opposite. So my fear is if we invest so much time with trainings, they will just co-opt that language and say, well, it is equity because this organization has Black artists. but they're not looking, they don't have a class analysis, or they don't, or historical analysis, and then they're going to go the other way. And then we're in a loop of like, oh, this commissioner said this. Oh, well, now we got to do another training. And that's, that has been my experience with trainings, is that it just gives people who want to be racist the ability to co-opt the language to just continue racism, but just give you a little hurdle that you have to be like, oh, okay, now we have to explain to you why that is racist, even though you used all these equitable words. So that's my fear, is that I don't want CARE to be stuck in a loop of constantly being involved with the commission when there are community members who should be heard and should be centered.
Can I throw a little nugget into kind of listening to both of what the three of you were just saying? But for historical context, at least the last 2 years that I've been hearing, when FATIA was, I think I came on right when FATIA was enrolled, and talking about onboarding, that really wasn't anything other than when's the next meeting with everything else going on with HR. But let's watch this 30-minute Beyond Diversity video with the intention that everybody was wanting to get everybody commission onboarded, the new commissioners, which is always adding and dropping people as much as we're about to add more to CARE sooner than later too. So it's like, I think everybody, with the pause of pandemic, there were no options to do a three-day thing again. But also everybody valued the importance of that and spoke to that. But it's like we do if we finally find a time where commission members and all the CARE members got together with something that was 3 days, and then 2 weeks later somebody drops off, and then it's another person coming in. It's kind of impossible to keep doing that. In regards to the CARE and the scope, and then what we're doing here, for me the feeling has always been that CARE has been waiting for commission to show up, whether it was two people actually watching the Beyond Diversity, and the majority of them not, or not coming to the joint committee meetings. So it's not that they don't, pun intended, care. It's just there was that lack of accountability all around, and without the process of this is what we're doing, like what Lydia was saying, we CARE leading the way of what is equity, but then also bringing in the commission, like what Trey was saying. And I don't know, I think just right here in terms of this, as I'm sitting here listening, I didn't know if going back to the scope and then saying it's like, where does, within this discussion, and y'all are the leaders, what you all can do today or the next meeting as well, is decide what does that process look like for onboarding CARE, and then making that jump from recommendation to actual process, and then inspiring the commission to show up, and then talking about the accountability, what that means. That's a lot, but I'm just like, what can CARE do right now to put on paper to change what was to what needs to be, and then not be waiting on commission, because commission will follow just like any good leaders, or what that means with accountability. But it has to start with action, not with waiting for somebody else that may or may not show up.
So I have a question. Understand both your points on trainings, how that happens, if it's effective, or are we just giving an excuse to what can be status quo? My question is, art team was this period, CARE came up in this period, and we're here now, and lots of stuff has happened in between. So there's, in my opinion, there's a need for assessment of then and now, what still exists, what's new, and how do we deal with that? Within that, the question is, then if we're going to hold the commission governing body accountable, how do we level set the expectation of what equity is, so that they understand what we're asking them, requiring them to do? Sorry.
Personally, could you elaborate on what you mean by that? What do you mean by level set?
Just expectation. If we're not going to hold training, and it's fine if we, if trainings is not effective, if we agree the training is not effective, or how trainings or what training is appropriate, I think the commission being held responsible for how they apply policy or make decisions based on programming for the agency, running of the agency. If we're not going to offer a paradigm for that, but we're going to hold them responsible for it, how do we come to a mutual, or how do we let them know what that is, instead of just shoving them out there and saying, okay, now we expect you to know what equity is by some definition, and we aren't assured that they have a concept of what that is.
So my issue with CARE is that it's just doing too much. And in having such a large scope and saying, okay, this is what staff is saying. Okay, now commissioners need a training. Okay, now community members, this body is not effective and has not been. We had one equitable year of funding, and that's it in decades history. So, and that's not to, that's just a fact to me. Seeing the numbers and seeing the equitable distribution, I think we just have to be very realistic about what's happening. So to me, instead of having such a wide scope and saying, let's just tackle racism at every level, having a much more narrow scope and saying, let's just focus on community transparency and engagement. Let's make sure community members feel heard, and that the commission is being, that we are transparent with the community about the commission's decisions. So whether that be reports, whether that be an equity barometer for commission members, whether that be reports to certain departments within Metro, to be told, actually, this was related in the commission about, the budget, but this is what is the reality of the budget. I think that actually goes a long way to doing the work of anti-racism. So ideally, I would love for CARE to do a lot of stuff and to be involved with every level of Metro Arts and to do teach-ins and to support commissioners understanding what racism is. But, I think when you are doing too much, you are not going to be as effective. We are not going to be as effective. If we can just say, let's start with, like as Chuck was saying, some level of action, and not coming in with the intention that they are going to listen to us, or we're going to make them listen to us. We just have to say our goal is to make sure community members feel like they are involved with this process. It shouldn't have been Daniel Singh to bring in over 100 applications for individual artists in this city. It shouldn't have been years before that, 22 applications. All of us in this room can probably name way more than 22 individual artists who need funding. So that's where I'm coming from, is that I feel like if we focus on community trust, community engagement, and transparency, and to say we want to have transparent commission meetings, we want to have transparent grant applications and cycles, what's going on with the budget, how you can get involved, that to me is the most effective measure and also reasonable in terms of our capacity as volunteers.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a question too, which relates to this dialogue about accountable to what. Is, you can tell it relates to my previous question. But I want to be accountable to a rule or a code, I know, because I feel like that is not driven by people's personalities or experiences. This is the standard to which we are held. These are the codes. That's why I keep going back to that. So I'm wondering, kind of thinking about equity defined with a rule, right, that is coded in our regulations and the way that, and so to commissioners, then to your point, it's like you abide by the rule or you don't, but then part of coming to that, right, is working together as a community with us and with council and whatever to provide those rules. So I don't know if that's help. I don't know if that's why I keep going back to it in terms of thinking about change that is sustainable and I just don't know what the role of this committee could be in that. And again, I'm just speaking from my experience as someone who the first thing I did, right, was look at all of the rules that guide us and the way we want to make decisions. And I just want more direction from those, I guess, too, in terms of quantifying it, right? And advocating for that. So.
No, excuse me. I have a little sinus stuff. I think it might be helpful if we kind of get back to the guidelines. I'm just like looking and, yeah, I just think it would be helpful, particularly page 2, where we talk about the vision and the scope of our work. I think and some of the stuff is highlighted. A lot of the things we've been throwing around in discussion is highlighted, and some of it is a little bit vague, but I think a couple of and maybe we should just read it really quickly, particularly sections 1.3 and 1.4, and then just if it's okay, I might just read that out loud, and then, we can go from there. Section 1.3, the vision and practices of the Committee for Anti-Racism and Equity. First being, be accountable to stakeholders of color, all genders, and other marginalized groups by viewing questions, issues, and topics of discussion through an anti-racist lens. Identify connections between systemic racism and other forms of marginalization, exclusion, and oppression, including those related to race, gender, sexuality, and ability. Be able to name and define systemic racism and its roots, recognize existing injustices, and commit to the ongoing work. The next section goes on to say to achieve its purpose. So to achieve those items listed, the CARE Committee will do the following. And this is our scope of work. The first being work to identify and transform policies and practices that perpetuate structural racism within its work as it impacts the larger arts ecosystem. Support and clarify the work of the agency that leans towards anti-racism. Identify opportunities for anti-racism education within the Nashville arts ecosystem. Identify partnership opportunities within the arts ecosystem to work toward racial equity. Make recommendations to the board that interrupt and eliminate racism and support race-based equity and inclusion in the arts ecosystem that impacts the community at large, and regularly report action and progress to Metro Arts Board of Commissioners. I think that's, for me, this is helpful in kind of identifying what, one, are we as a committee, do we agree upon these things? Is this, do we agree upon the scope? And then more, I guess, in depth, what are those specific steps that we can take to kind of accomplish some of these things? I will just put out there. Sorry.
That was exactly it. Thinking about, also in the context of our agenda and what we're discussing, like just thinking about prioritizing specifically those two sections as places where the next steps we need to take in meeting and figuring out what actionable things that can be within our scope belong and how to define that, and then the steps to include that. Also, like whether that's the best place to place the definition of equity in between 1.3 or 1.4, and then also how is CARE properly defining the scope of community engagement that it wants to do? I think the current scope does speak to that, but that's also a potential place if you're thinking about beyond the opportunities for education, but also providing more engagement with Nashville's arts ecosystem and individuals and communities and groups, what they need or what you all define they need. Is that the place where you can define that also and think about those actions that are within the scope and also doable?
I would say that I agree with that, Josiah, that I think that it's good that for the vision and practices that we put equity there because it is a vision and a practice. So I would agree with that. And then I also think I'm glad you mentioned the scope because it does have, at least 2 points on, community engagement, and then also that the role between us and the commission is to do reporting. And to me, I think that this is within our capacity. And I would just add in terms of identifying opportunities and identify partnership opportunities under scope. I think we should perhaps maybe in another meeting elaborate on what community engagement looks like. I know community members would not be able to attend a 10 a.m. on a Friday. And so I would like if we could do evening meetings so that community members and our public comments could be a little more stretched out so folks feel comfortable to speak and not just confine themselves to the 2 minutes. But I think we can discuss that later, but I think it's all within the scope of what we're discussing.
That's always been an issue with CARE, the times of the meetings, but because of staff is why they were put during the day. We used to meet late afternoon or early evening, and because of staff is why they were switched to daytime.
I will say, as I remember that, I was on staff when we had to meet in the evenings. It's helpful if we establish a schedule so I can plan. As when I say I mean a staff member. There are times where, you have to work outside of your normal hours, but it's a lot easier if you say, okay, in 2 months, I know I'm going to have a meeting at 5 o'clock on a Wednesday versus hey, can you meet this next week at 5 o'clock on Wednesday? So, maybe we're not at this exact point yet, but yeah, definitely. I think having a regular schedule of meetings where we don't necessarily have to notice meetings a week ahead of time would be nice. So figuring out what that looks like, I think it helps everyone plan and prioritize when we're going to meet, and it allows for community members to know well ahead of time when that happens, and it's consistent. And I think, and Dr. Coleman, I know you kind of mentioned kind of establishing some of these norms as well. Just consistency, I think, and especially for community members. If we say, hey, we're going to meet and this is just, I'm not saying that we should do this, but if we're going to meet the first Friday of every month at 4 p.m., then everyone knows when we're going to meet. So that would be a great action item for us to establish. Just regularity of meetings and having it at a time that's accessible is a part of equity work, right? Sorry.
I just wanted to ask too if there is, I'm not aware if there's a common repository for us, like a Google Drive or something where a lot of these documents could be kept, because that is a huge challenge, right? That I'm trying to work on with the commission, right? Is lack of historical memory and just where everything kind of lives, I guess, electronically. And I don't know if that exists here, but I would be so supportive of it.
I know Metro Arts has a, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, we used to have that, but it ended up being more than one and two different systems, and you couldn't combine the systems. And we struggled with how open that documentation was going to be. So that would be a conversation on access and eyes and all that.
Yeah, I'm not, I get a little nervous about speaking about information sharing, and but I know there's a website that Metro Arts has that's a little bit more creative than the typical Metro website, but it does connect back in some way. But I wonder if that's possibly a way that we can do, and I'm kind of looking over at legal, like maybe I don't know if that's allowed, but
A Google Drive repository.
yeah.
So I talked to IT about this. SharePoint. Access to that, I think it's a little bit more difficult. I haven't delved into like the ITS verbiage behind it, because generally the SharePoint is for metro.gov email addresses, but it's something that I've pinged them about that I believe would be a little bit more helpful than a Google Drive, or also creating a part of the website that has information for transparency's sake that would also be available to, that would have information for transparency's sake that would also be available to members of the public, so they know what the commission is looking at, what information is out there, what the commission is using in their considerations. But I will say I haven't gone full in depth on that, because the commissioner created her Google Drive. So, but yeah, that's something I'm more than willing to help with.
One thing I think we need to talk about, and we probably don't have time this meeting, but we brought it up at a couple CARE meetings in the past year and a half, is that we're part of a government system, right? So, like, yes, we had an equitable funding year, but what it raised flag was that Thrive wasn't legal in procurement terms, which I brought up several times in meetings because we have contracts with other Metro departments, and if it's over a certain amount, there has to be two other bids. And, because no one does what we do, all of our contracts have to be like $50 to $100 under that limit. So I think that's one thing we have to think about is how can the bylaws are just for organizations, right? So do we have to change the bylaws if we to find a way to fund individual artists on a regular basis? If Thrive doesn't meet the procurement, then we have to find a way to design it so that it does, because this year was equitable, but did it raise flags that's going to prevent it from happening over and over again? So we need to help find systems that make the equitable funding within the legal scope of what the Metro government allows, and so that it's sustainable and not just a one-time thing.
I have a quick question. Are we doing any edits to this? The guidelines?
I think that we can propose edits to it, and maybe that's something that we work on and we place on the agenda for next meeting. But when I recall, we've actually literally in meetings we've pulled up different policies on the screen and we've redlined the documents together, as an exercise, and then there's back and forth, there's discussion, and then collectively we've asked staff to kind of clean it up and then you bring it back to us at another meeting that says, okay, these are the proposed changes that we have to this policy. So I think, I don't know if we can do that today, but I think, if that's something we want to do, maybe at a next meeting, we can literally pull up these guidelines and kind of discuss it. Does that make sense? I think that might be helpful for us as well in establishing common ground and And yeah. So yes, we can edit it, but
Do you want to discuss onboarding and then I know we've spoken a bit about what the meeting pattern in general should be like, and what would be best for the current and possible future members, but maybe we can tackle C and D of Section E.
yeah, let's. I guess onboarding. I know that we've kind of touched on that a little bit in different ways, but I think a couple of the things I think we need to is reviewing of the reports and kind of familiarizing all members that we bring in of the history of not only Metro Arts but CARE. So maybe, I don't know, do we identify a package of documents that we consider as onboarding documents for new members? And I'm just opening this up for discussion.
So to help start to figure that out, I have questions to Lydia and Fatia. When you started, because I know there's some time between when you each started, what would it have been helpful, what would have guided you better in terms of being new members for this committee?
For me, just to have learned more about the committee, such as the history, which I've been learning more recently than back then, and even, the guidelines. I don't remember, and maybe I did see this before, but I don't remember it. So just having something that's more concrete on what the mission of the committee is, what the purpose is.
Yeah, I would echo that. I actually had thought when Commissioner Heather was speaking about the shared drive that she meant a shared drive specifically to CARE, which I think would, okay. Yeah, I would have liked to receive a drive with the report and to have, all that information ahead of time. And then perhaps to have, I did eventually get the meeting with the staff, but to also meet with staff and ask them questions about the drive and all the information about CARE.
So I guess then the mechanism, or one of the mechanisms, one of the goals could be share documents that are specifically defining the guidelines, the history, and the mission. And any other information that we think might be pertinent, and then compiling a drive where those documents and as much of the other stuff is available. So then you can canvass the information that defines how we've existed. Does that include the art team? How far back, I think is what my question, how far back do you want? Do you want it all? Does it matter?
Because the report was our team.
Report was our team, but we had several, whoever was the administrative person for the department determined, where they had to work. It determines where those drives were collected. So there are disparate repositories. So, but that's 2017 forward. So my question is, do you want all of the history or as much as we can provide, or does it matter?
I think it's always best to put as much as possible and let someone decipher. And if there's a way to organize the drive in such a way with a note about, here's the art folder. If you want to look through it, you can. You can just look into this folder specifically to just get you caught up very quickly. I personally like to have everything at my disposal so I can make the best decisions.
And for me, I really don't want to receive a whole bunch of documents. So an overview is good. And then, as she's mentioning, having access to more, if I need more information or if a person needs more information, I think would be helpful. So providing an overview that's thorough enough, but then giving access that we can dig in deeper if we need to.
And I can say that on behalf of staff, our Restorative Arts and Equity Coordinator, Claudia Lahan, Chuck, and myself have been going through a lot of the wealth, the abundance of information from art that are at least in Metro Arts possession from art team to the present day and working to organize it. And we can certainly find like a good place in between what each of you all that provides you all the context you need for today, but not in an overwhelming way, something that's streamlined, that's organized, and can provide the necessary foundation for new members to know what's going on going forward.
I'll just recommend quickly like a table of contents with links to each of the PDFs and then just an asterisk next to the ones that are most pertinent, or any type of color coding. But I do like a table of contents on a Word doc.
And we can get that to the group that's here now, not just for the onboarding of the new ones, but as y'all are creating the process going forward and looking at what needs to be there, what's relevant and what doesn't, for sure.
Could I just say too, like in terms of for someone who a lot of text is difficult for me, but I also have to encounter a lot of text every day, but I guess I always like to think about moving to visual representation too, or if there are videos, or to your point about like a summary as well. That's what I've tried to do kind of with commissioners, is take a lot and then do like a 2-pager that would be agreed upon, right, as a summary. So those kinds of processes, I think, can make a drive more accessible to people and meet them where they are, which is an important thing, I guess, for onboarding. But that may not happen right away, I know. But
Absolutely. That's why, as you can see in your material, we definitely opted for the visuals as much as possible. No, absolutely. We'll definitely work on that.
And also, as Lydia mentioned, so you when you were coming on, you came and met with
Staff, yeah.
But you took it upon yourself to do that.
They contacted me. Yeah.
Oh, see, no one did that for me. And that would have been helpful. So having that opportunity to have a conversation prior to just jumping into a meeting and not knowing what in the world you all are talking about, looking at reports about things and what is this about, but having a conversation beforehand would be extremely helpful. So doing that even before the documents.
And to be fair, when you came on was when I came on and staff wasn't even talking to each other because we couldn't. So you were not left out. You were not alone.
Well, and when you came on, we didn't even know you were coming on. The other care members, 4 new care members came on. 3 resigned within 2 meetings because they had no idea what they were doing. And she came in, she had no idea. We didn't know they were coming. Yeah, it was very poorly designed.
But if I'm hearing correctly, it sounds like we can, maybe at the next meeting, we can compile a list of onboarding action items that we include into the guidelines of care that are clearly stated as maybe another section that these are the steps of onboarding. I'm hearing, compiling a drive of resources, a table of contents so it's clear, having overviews with information that is more summaries of kind of all of those documents, as well as different types of information that are visual and text-based, and then also opportunities for an official meeting with staff to kind of go over what's been shared and kind of have dialogue around any questions or clarifications of that process. Yeah, I'm just saying this out loud as we think about agenda items for next meeting, making sure that we're kind of speaking about this now while we're all together, and then of course I'll be working with staff to compile an agenda for next meeting. Yeah, I'm stating that for everyone. If anyone has anything I need to add to that list specifically as it relates to onboarding.
And when will the next meeting be?
When will the next meeting be? Yes, that is on the list, item D, I guess, and we probably do need to get moving on this agenda. So it sounds like one of the things that's been identified as having a meeting that's accessible for community members, so not meeting necessarily during the morning time. Well, we don't want to meet late at night. What time do you all feel is 4 o'clock, 4:30? What time do you all think would be? I guess we can start with time of day and then maybe move to day of week.
We also need to, not that we're planning the next 2 or 3, which everybody wants that consistency, but we need to wait for Camille on something too. So what works with her schedule, but definitely shifting it back towards an evening, it sounds like. Just throwing that out there for thought discussion.
So I have a question on acceptable logistics. Are we restricted to meet here? Do we have to meet here?
I don't think so. I think we've met at various locations, like we've met at community centers and libraries.
Okay. So yes, because that's.
It has to be a Metro-owned property.
Okay, so that includes community centers, libraries.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Because that's what Art Team used to do, and our meetings were like Wednesday or Thursday, from what I remember, Wednesday or Thursday, 5:30 ish, and we met around the community, which I thought was a really cool thing to be able to. And that way, that also allows for more equitable access to members of that community to show up and have access to what we're doing and have a voice. So, yes, thank you for that.
And if we work back from that, when Camille's here and it's, comprehensive attendance, then Vivian and other staff, we can look for other community centers and stuff like that to shift around at that time what's available and stuff and get back to y'all.
I wonder if installations of public art is included?
As long as it's a building that's owned by Metro.
Oh, okay. All right. I was just thinking.
I'm curious, what were you
I was thinking just of artistic places that
okay.
could be included in that list of things.
And would we be able to do, we'd obviously, like the recording or, what's it called, broadcasting? And I don't know if that's, I'm a fan of recording everything just because that's transparency and, but yeah, I don't know if that happens. I think it does, right? In libraries, or it can be. Yeah, he's given thumbs up, so that's awesome.
So it sounds like we can't meet at Ghost Ballet, but we can meet at other buildings as long as there's, internet, Wi-Fi, structure, protection from the elements. That sounds good.
Do we want to start with what next month do we want to meet, and then we can always, based on the month we choose. Based on the month we choose, the staff can put together, and based on the month and the specific time of day that are the preferences, we can also create a doodle poll to provide to all the members, including the member that's not here today. That way you all can confirm, and then we can get that confirmed and provide the public notice as soon as possible.
And I guess this is just open for discussion. How regularly, I know this body hasn't met till February. I think that's probably too long to not meet. But how regular, and I don't think it's clearly defined. It says we need to meet regularly, but it's not clearly defined as to how regular. Is that something we want to match up with the commission regularity? So every cycle for commission meetings, would you all like to have a care meeting before it leading up to that?
I would love to have it as part of a cycle related to the commission meetings, but also not limited to that too. But I think that's helpful in terms of like, this is where we do the work and then it goes there. But that's just a preference.
Meeting, talking to each other, discussion in between. That was something that, as art team, we were free to communicate and discuss under the current. We can't do that. So, but it bothers me that we cannot, because the work, we can't come here, have a meeting, and say the work's done, because the work's done in between. So how do we address that?
I was going to say, Tessa, do you remember if I know that Chair Angelico mentioned about the online thing that was just state representatives. When was that legislation? Was that later this fall that we brought that up, or?
I believe that was late last spring.
Or when it was acceptable for us to take. And for the new ones, CARE had looked into like a chat room that would not have comments, but it was already something approved, and we found out from legal that it was only for state reps who don't even use it anyways, and we want to use it, and it would have given a transparent platform. But
there is a Metro platform, though, like that council uses, the Council Connect, but we can't use that.
That's what legal opined, is that it's for Metro Council only, not for boards and commissions.
Yeah. But was that, just to answer, was that coming up for legislation later this fall or next year, or we had to wait, or even just throwing it out there for the context of what we're trying to talk about? So.
I'm not aware of legislation, whether that be local to Metro Council or state, that would allow the Metro boards and commissions to use an online platform.
Okay. Thank you.
But I can look into that and get back to you.
Okay.
Could CARE members meet if only one commissioner was present?
Let me get back to you on that.
Or if no commissioner was present?
Yeah, so the Open Meetings Act, the Sunshine Laws, applies to commissioners specifically because they're appointed to the commission, and the commission is the ultimate decision maker for this body. I'll get back to you on whether it would be appropriate for community committee members to meet.
And as of right now, I don't think that, going back to what Chair Harden was saying, as of right now, I don't know if we have a commission meeting in June. I may be wrong, and we may get one after today. I don't know. But, yeah, just throwing that out there.
One thing that I thought was really effective as our team is we had one-on-ones with commission members. We would select, each of us would meet one-on-one with commission members and talk to them about the equity work. I thought it was really effective. I don't know how many you met with, but
A few. It was hard to schedule, but
yeah,
I mean, it was good to get.
I definitely, if that's okay, I'm happy to meet with each of you individually before our next meeting. If I can manage it, I will do my best. But yeah,
we all met with different ones. I mean, everybody didn't meet with the same commission. We each chose one or two commissioners to make appointments with, and meet. No, I'd love to meet with you, but you know what I mean? So you don't have to meet with every single person.
I mean, that was useful,
Yeah.
in terms of being able to see what their mindset is,
Yes.
and their philosophy, and also, I was going to say coach, not coach, but to have that exchange of then what the expectation of and purpose of CARE, our team, was at that time. So, yeah.
So I think because there's a lot of work to be done, I would push for us to meet once a month. And if there's a possibility for staff to maybe set, the last Friday, I would try to push past work hours just so working class artists can also make it. So if we can push it to 6 or 5:30, that would be great. So if it's the last Friday of every month, 6 p.m., and we'll notify about location, that would be ideal.
Or the other weekdays, nights too. And that could be the doodle, but just don't end there.
Yeah, and I guess I hesitate to ask y'all.
Yeah, not Friday. I realize that. Yeah.
If you guys, I'm sure, just like this meeting, if we could maybe have a doodle poll, and then we can propose that at the next meeting. We can establish the next meeting, and then at the next meeting we can say, all right, is this going to be our normal meeting schedule moving forward? And I guess we would also need to try to align with the regular commission schedule, so we're meeting before the commission meetings for each month. So,
And then, it could be either, I guess, the week of the commission meeting or the week before. So that opens up more days conceivably.
yes.
And
preferably not on the same day.
not on the same day. Yeah. And then maybe also thinking about like council meetings are on Tuesday night or, yeah, that's right. First and third. So maybe that's, yeah.
But also, when you think about time, if we're going to use community centers and libraries, it has to be on a day when they're open. Yeah.
I want to slip back just briefly to the question around authority. What authority does CARE have? What real power, impact does it have? And how do we start to have that addressed? Because we can meet and make all this stuff, but if we're going to end up where we've been if we don't address that.
I wonder if to that point, I would love some prompts to think about that for myself in terms of writing and thinking that through, whether that's something like having a discussion here too, but just preparing our thoughts. That feels like a very central discussion and something that I'm thinking about a lot. And I would, I can just journal about it, but I wondered if there were some ways it could be framed to before the next meeting. I don't know. Homework, I like it, but.
I mean, one of the first thoughts that come to mind is what does power in the context of care look, feel, sound like? And specifically that word came to mind because that's where a lot of the systemic realities and hardships and histories that we navigate come down to. And so even if just thinking of that in the context of like where power is seen absent for care, and there's been dialogue here about like, well, is care trying to do too much? Maybe that's why it's so frustrating, because is care taking upon more than it can bear? But also in really thinking about the ways that the scope allows care to do things that it hasn't maybe tapped into enough or hasn't been supported to tap into, what might that look like? And so if just starting if starting at the end and thinking backwards of like, well, what does it feel like for a reality or a change in the community that you can connect to care, that you feel like was happening in this space, and then thinking backwards from that of what it takes to get there. That could be things that can help us translate actionable duties within this scope as we look to possibly edit it.
Do we really think CARE is doing too much? What is CARE doing? That's so much. That's what I want to know.
It's kind of both, right? Because I remember one time in one of the most different chaotic commission meetings we've had in the last 2 years, I can't remember which one, but I know Mattia was the chair at the time, and obviously wanting to speak and hear from CARE and like follow Robert's rules and everything, and looking around being like, is that something for CARE? So asking the same question with all due respect to CARE, but not knowing where to go with it because there's no process in this from going from recommendations to actual process.
I guess those are good questions to reflect upon. I think we're running up against our time, so I do want to check in with staff about any updates on staff and programming. Are there any things we need to discuss there?
Not to my knowledge. I'll defer to Chuck.
No, I mean, we will be having that community engagement event, the coffee talk for June, probably at the downtown farmers market, but I'm not sure, back to what we said earlier, if anybody could meet there by chance. Not that we're asking everybody to show up that's here, but I'm sure we'll be meeting or contacting individually again before then.
I did, and I enjoyed the last coffee talk. It was good, yeah. So, thank you for putting that together. Any old or new business that we need to discuss? I mean, I know we did a lot of that.
Will those be throughout the summer, the coffees? Because I can never go during the school year, but that's good.
Plan on it, and I'm sure everybody here knows, as far as new and old business, we have a commission meeting in an hour, so if you have a sandwich, come on to that or stay out here.
Could you add tea to those coffee talks?
Awesome. I guess if no one has anything else, I do want to say thank you all. I know that I didn't know how today was going to go. I was a little nervous, not because not because of you all, just because I know that it's been a while and I do really care, no pun intended, about Metro Arts and the arts community here, and I do see the potential in this body particularly. And I know that these conversations are very challenging. I know we're not going to agree on everything or a lot of things, but I appreciate you all for taking these norms into account today and for the conversations we've had and will continue to have. So thank you all very much. And yeah, with that being said, I will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. All in favor? Do I need to do that, right? No.
You don't have to motion.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, sorry. Meeting.
But if you want to, I mean.
But most of them do. You don't
Yes.
have to.
Well, thank you all. Meeting is officially adjourned. So.
Thank you.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.